Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to War in the Pacific Admirals Edition. It is December 13th, and we are coming off a major surface engagement, or a series of surface engagements, just off the coast of Mersing in the Malay Peninsula. This is part of our Let's Play series, or play-by-email series, in which we're trying to play as the Allies, while XTRG, a fellow YouTuber who's linked in the description as always, is playing as the Japanese. And we're about a week into the Japanese steamroller period of this game, where they have a huge advantage in the Pacific due to the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor and various other sort of factors, being the Dutch forces being weak and the Dutch East Indies, the British being largely caught off guard. And that's the situation right now. Now, if we take a look at probably the thing that's pressing on everybody's minds, is last turn there was a series of nighttime surface engagements in and around the Mersing area. The initial engagements were between some Japanese torpedo boats and Japanese destroyers, and our battleships, the Repulse and the Prince of Wales. And while our first engagement was successful, sinking a torpedo boat and damaging another without much in the way of damage, the second was disastrous. The Japanese had a small force of 2 destroyers, and they engaged our battle fleet at about 2,000 yards in the middle of the night. I had been trying to close with the enemy force, the enemy sort of transports and heavy forces, and we actually did engage his cruisers and did some damage, although I don't think it was very, very substantial. And then a follow-on engagement was a pair of Japanese destroyers that came in at point-blank range and loosed some long-lance torpedoes at our battleships. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Type 93 long-lance torpedo has a 1,000-pound warhead. These things were deadly. A single torpedo actually sank the heavy cruiser Houston in the same turn. So we lost the Houston, we lost the Dutch light cruiser Java, and 2 of those long-lance torpedoes went into the side of the Prince of Wales, and 1 went into the side of the Repulse. Fortunately, a third, which hit the Prince of Wales, was a dud. So they actually hit him 3 times. They only had 2 explosions, which was, at least for now, a godsend. Now you'll see on the map here we've got a couple of task forces with a little E next to it, which those basically mean they're escort task forces. Essentially, they're task forces trying to retreat because they've suffered severe damage, and they're being escorted by smaller ships. And the battleships, because they were hit by those torpedoes, they never made it to the engagement which occurred with some Japanese troop ships, in which our heavy cruisers and our light cruisers engaged what probably was either a brigade or a regiment of Japanese infantry and basically annihilated it at sea. So we inflicted more than 4,600 casualties, at least according to our intelligence, on the Japanese invasion fleet, which was going to reinforce the Japanese troops at Mersing. So that was a huge success. The Japanese got no additional reinforcements last turn because that entire convoy was obliterated. But our battleships played no real part in that. Now, the first battleship here is the battle cruiser Repulse. She suffered 1 long-lance torpedo hit, and she's in reasonably good shape. Obviously, some severe damage. She's not really in a position to fight, but she's only got 20 major flood damage, 16 major engine damage, 22 system damage, and then some additional sort of damage that can be repaired without a shipyard. So the major damage is stuff that requires being put into a dry dock. Anything above that is essentially damage that can be repaired pierside over long and arduous efforts by the crew. With that being said, the 33 fires, or the 33 engine damage, 28 flood damage, and 22 system damage means that the Repulse can still make 14 knots, which, while not fast, is at least somewhat respectable. You can see here this green circle represents how far the Repulse can go, I believe, in 1 phase. So there's 2 phases in every 2 phases in every turn, and I believe the Repulse can go essentially kind of down toward this area in the next turn. If not, if I'm wrong and it's only toward here, it still gets her away from Singapore, and I think she should be able to get out of Japanese air cover before the sun comes up. That's the key thing here, is because the Japanese, for whatever reason, didn't bomb our forces. I think it was overcast and cloudy, so I don't think the Japanese had the ability to launch much in the way of air raids against our forces. They largely escaped that. But now the key is getting out of their air cover's range as soon as we can, without hopefully taking much in the way of bombers. So you can see here the Repulse can still make 14 knots. She's traveling with 2 destroyers that have very low fuel. Fortunately, the fuel can be replenished by the Repulse, now that we'll use op points in the middle of the turn. So while theoretically they can go this far, they may not be able to quite get that far. In any event, I'm routing Prince of Wales through Singapore, and then I'm going to have them head south. I don't think they'll quite get this far because of that need to refuel the destroyers, but if we can get south of Singapore, we're going to get rapidly further and further away from his aircraft, and hopefully we can get far enough away so that the Japanese bombers don't engage the Repulse, and the Repulse can escape. The Repulse is going at flank speed, which basically means there's a risk of additional flood and system damage occurring. When you move damaged ships at flank speed, you run the risk of catastrophic sort of breakdowns, which can rapidly increase flooding. But if we don't move it at flank speed, they're going to get hit by air attacks for sure. So I would rather take the risk and move as quick as we can, and rather than be assured, basically, of seeing 70 enemy bombers come in and finish us off. So we're going to move at flank speed, and we're going to try and get away here to the south, and also navigate all these Japanese submarines around here. All these little red icons are Japanese submarines, and so they're at 14 knots. The Japanese are going to be close to about our speed. They may be able to keep up, but the faster we're moving, the other reason you go for flank speed is the faster that you're moving, the less likely they are to get a hit on you. So if you move, for example, we moved our battleships through this area at flank speed in the last turn at 30 plus knots. There were a couple of encounters with subs. We even sank one, but none of them were able to get a hit on us because we were moving so fast they were never really able to get into a good firing position. The game simulates that. That's accurate in real life, where if a submarine detected an enemy task force moving at 30 knots or even 20 knots, generally the task force would be by it before the sub could ever get into an effective firing position. If your ships are moving more slowly and the sub detects you, they can basically sprint out ahead of you and then lay in wait and attack you at that point. So the Repulse has a fair chance of escaping, I think. The other reason I'm ducking it under Singapore is we've got a fighter fleet in Singapore of 48 fighters. They're not very good fighters. They're Buffaloes. But, if properly handled, it at least attempts to break up the enemy air attacks. So that's the Repulse situation. A fair chance of getting away. If the enemy aircraft spot her, then she'll probably get sunk. But she might get away before the enemy can even bring her into bear. If she gets down in here, I think if she gets to Linga, or even 1 hex north, I don't think his bombers can quite reach there. I think their max range is like just south of Singapore, so like something in this area. So the further we get away, the better our odds. Instead of taking a straight sprint south, which was another option, I am taking a slight detour, so we are moving a couple of hexes out of our way, which means we probably won't get as far, but the reason there is to avoid as many of these Japanese submarines as possible. There's a lot of subs to the east of Singapore. Really, there's only one sub across our path to the west. So the thought is, rather than sprint directly, we'll move out to the west a little bit. That brings us to the Prince of Wales, which was also not sunk, but and by the way, so Repulse, I'm going to try and escape to the south. I'm not sure if there's any dockyards here. There's some small dockyards in Java, but really the goal is to kind of just heal it up, and if we can get that flood and engine damage down to the major limits, then we can just send it off to South Africa for repairs. So the idea would be get minimal system repairs and then send it to Cape Town, where there's a massive dry dock, and spend a month or two there repairing the damage that they've suffered. Again, if they get down here, they'll be out of enemy air cover, so we can just move them really slowly to the west at that point. And now, that brings us to, Surabaya or Batavia. They have dry docks, but not very big ones. So I think the dry dock there isn't one in Batavia. There is one in Surabaya, or however you pronounce that. But it can only hold, I think, where is it? The repair yards can only hold 8,000 tons of shipping, but they can still do some minimal repairs, so that's kind of what we're trying to do. And now, without further ado, folks, we will take a look at the Prince of Wales. While I'm hopefully optimistic about the Repulse, the Prince of Wales is not in as good a shape. She took 2 long lance torpedoes. As you can see here, the Prince of Wales has 66 float damage and 52 engine damage. That's not insurmountable. If there was no risk of enemy air attack, there's a fair chance, if we could deal with the submarines, that she might still get away. The 51 flood damage is major and is a serious issue, and so is the engine damage at 38. But again, if there was no threat of enemy air attack, then we'd have a much better chance. The problem is, there is. And the good news here is that there's only 15 system damage, but the float damage and the engine damage are causing the Repulse to only be able to make a maximum speed of 5 knots. At 5 knots, she's a sitting duck. We've seen all of these Japanese submarines around here. We're probably going to get sunk by one of them. We could theoretically make it to Singapore before the sun comes up at 5 knots. We're moving at full speed. Again, that 51 float damage, a very high probability that that will increase. It could even cause her to sink just by moving at flank speed. But if we don't move at flank speed, we'll only move 1 hex, and then we'll still be a hex outside of Singapore, inside the range of the Japanese GM3 and GM4 bombers in Southeast Asia. We need to make a run for Singapore. That is our only chance of saving the Prince of Wales. Again, if this was in the South Pacific and there was no Japanese air cover around and there were only a few submarines, probably have a good chance of making it. But in this scenario, when we have to sprint and hope that the enemy doesn't get bombers on us, that's going to be challenging. So what we'll do for her is, because I don't want to... So here's the thing. I do have dry docks in Singapore, but I'm not sending the Repulse to Singapore because I don't want her to get destroyed while being repaired. That's the other thing, is the Japanese, if they start bombing Singapore, they can destroy shipping that is in your dry docks. And I would rather the Repulse take her chance and get away than get, basically laid up in Singapore, keep taking bomb damage, and then, us have to scuttle her when Singapore eventually falls because we weren't able to get her repaired well enough. Meanwhile, in the case of the Prince of Wales, we really don't have much choice with the level of damage that she has, with her slow speed. We are sending her straight for Singapore. She'll hopefully get repaired in Singapore and be able to escape. But again, first she's got to get there. I'm not terribly optimistic about those odds. Once she gets there, she's probably got to be there for 2 weeks or so, I'd say, to get this flood and engine damage down, even if she survives that long. And then you've got to also, factor in the sake that once the Japanese get, aircraft operating out of Mersing or Kutan, or even, bombers hitting Singapore out of Kota Bharu, or torpedo bombers out of Saigon going for the ships in port there, it's going to be hard to keep her alive. But first things first, she's got to get there for us to have to worry about that. So that's the situation with the Prince of Wales. Additionally, if we do send the Prince of Wales to Singapore and we were to send the Repulse, the dry dock limit is 50,000 tons. We'd get a penalty if we had 2 ships in there, which would total more than 50,000 tons. So we'll do our best to get them away. What about the other ships in our task forces? Well, we only had a couple of other ships that survived. We had quite a few light cruisers, including the American light cruiser Boise and some Dutch light cruisers, the De Ruyter. I think the Dragon is British, it is. Actually, its radar's been knocked out, so that's a problem. But in any event, those ships are up here. They're low on fuel, and their objective is going to be returning to Batavia. They have enough fuel, I think, to get there. Maybe not quite, but actually we're waypointing them through Singapore, where they'll refuel in Singapore. So we've got those light cruisers up here in the north. The other good thing with them being up there is maybe, just maybe, they'll take some attention away from maybe they'll take some attention away from the Prince of Wales. You see a task force of 5 or 6 ships, and maybe, just maybe. Same for the submarines. Maybe the submarines will focus on them. We've also got one destroyer, the Vendetta, which has suffered serious damage. I broke her off from the rest of the task force, refueled her at the port of Mersing to suck some of that fuel away so the Japanese don't get it. Used quite a few of her op points. She's not going anywhere. She's probably going to sink. She's on fire to the tune of 84, so she probably won't even make it. But if she does, we'll try and get her back to Singapore as well. In addition to that, we have some other ships coming up from the south, which I've formed into 2 task forces. There's a surface task force with 3 light cruisers and 4 destroyers that I'm sending north to meet up with the Prince of Wales, because our escorts for these ships are pretty limited. 2 destroyers for the Prince of Wales, 2 for the Repulse. So I'm sending these 3 light cruisers and 4 destroyers north to hook up with the Prince of Wales and protect her in the event that XTRG sends any surface forces south. And then I've also broken off 3 of the best destroyers that are in this force at anti-submarine warfare, and they're going to be sort of hunting these 3 hexes to the east of Singapore in an effort to cut these Japanese submarines down to size and maybe give a better chance for the Prince of Wales to get away. Similarly, I've formed up some submarine task forces out of Singapore, some mine layers and defensive mine layers, harbor defense motor launches, which can be very good at anti-submarine warfare. And I've also put together another anti-submarine warfare task force with a destroyer, a couple of minesweepers, and another harbor defense motor launch. Again, going to be sweeping the seas to the east of Singapore to try and knock these Japanese submarines down a peg. In that line, while we're talking about these task forces, I've assigned 32 of my Buffalo fighters to have a combat air patrol over the Prince of Wales. They're going to be set to a 15 patrol. Maybe we should do 70. We'll do 70% of the task force will be up in combat air patrol status. And we'll also go ahead and have one of these guys fly over the Repulse. Just because I'd hate for the Repulse to get hit because I was not, paying no attention to the Repulse and giving all my love and attention to the Prince of Wales. The remaining 30% will be in escort duty, which we'll get to here in a second. So we've got those 46 fighters that are ready that'll be operating over those forces. In addition to that, we've also got some 21 fighters, Dutch fighters, operating out of Sumatra. And these guys are also tired because they were flying cap over our task force last turn. But they're going to be shielding Task Force 162 as well from the air. So hopefully these Buffaloes are able to limit how many enemy aircraft attack our battleships. They're flying at lower altitudes at 10,000 feet, mainly because I expect the enemy to hit me with Bettys and Nels. Those typically come in around 9 to 12,000 feet, and while you're generally better off diving on an enemy to attack them, if we're flying at level or slightly, if we're flying too far up, if we're flying at like 15 or 20,000 feet, there's a good chance that the Buffaloes, these B339s, are basically Dutch versions of the Buffaloes. If you're flying too high up, there's a good chance your fighters will miss the enemy formations and they won't engage. So we're flying at roughly level altitude. They'll come in on the Bettys and be okay. If the Japanese are flying fighter cover at like 20,000 feet, that'll put us at a disadvantage if they do engage. But there's also a chance if the Japanese are flying that high up that they won't actually have an effective cap because they'll be disengaged from sort of the main action. In addition to that, I've moved 8 Buffaloes over to Palembang, which is also on the island of Sumatra, and these guys will be providing long-range cap over the Repulse as the Repulse heads south. So as this force moves south, so we've got essentially 24 fighters assigned to provide combat air patrol over the Repulse, while we have some, like 53 aircraft assigned for combat air patrol over the Prince of Wales. Again, that is not all going to be over the aircraft or over the ships at the same time. You'll probably see 15 to 20 fighters in formation at a given time. In addition to that, I've moved 1 squadron of the Flying Tigers down the Malay Peninsula, and they're finally going to get into action this turn. There's 21 of them ready. They've got very good pilot experience at level 60, very high morale at 18. Their fatigue's a little bit high at 19, and their objective is going to be to send 50% of their fighters, so about 10 of them, will fly over Mersing in a long-range combat air patrol. So essentially they'll try and gain air superiority over Mersing. And then the other 10 or so will be escorts for bombing aircraft that may be hitting these Japanese formations. The reason I'm trying to gain combat sort of supremacy over Mersing is because I anticipate he's going to be sending fighters over Mersing to protect his formations, because it does look like there's more task forces coming in, those guys moving west. I don't know where these guys are moving, but it looks like there's at least one more task force moving west, which could be attempting to land more reinforcements at Mersing, which would obviously put us at a disadvantage. So I'm going to try and gain air superiority over Mersing while I unleash my torpedo bombers. So the torpedo bombers were very effective 2 turns ago. I gave them last turn off because all my fighters essentially were assigned to combat air patrol over my naval task forces. Now that I'm freeing up about 30% of those fighters to perform escort duties, and I've also got an additional 21 fighters that are arriving in the form of the Flying Tigers. I'm going to unleash my 21 torpedo bombers, the 19 wildebeests, and the 2 swordfish, and hopefully we can get some of these, sink some of these enemy ships near Mersing. We don't have great range. You only get 5 hexes of range with those things, but nonetheless, we're hoping they can come in and hit these task forces with their bombs. In addition to that, what else am I doing? I have heavy bombers here. They're still ordered to bomb the airfields near Saigon. They didn't do a very effective job of that last turn. I think part of that's because it was overcast, and part of that's also because they didn't. Many of them had just transferred from their previous base. But we're going to get 10 bombers up, and we're going to try and hit Saigon. Maybe that'll disrupt their air forces enough to not be quite so effective against us. We'll probably move those B-17s at another date or something to that effect. But anyway, we're going to try and bomb Saigon again. What else? I think that's mainly it. I did do one other thing here. In an effort to beef up my attacks on the enemy ships in the region, I brought in 18 Catalina flying boats, which were based out of the Philippines, and they're now based out of Singapore, so I transferred them into the Far East Command. I used political points to do that. And they're going to be using torpedoes. So they're actually torpedo bombers. They carry 2 Mark 13 air-launched torpedoes, so hopefully that'll be good for something against the enemy shipping. So with that being said, and Jack, I don't have much in the way of British carriers yet. The only carrier currently in theater is the Hermes, which is up here at Trincomalee, however you pronounce that. The Hermes up here. She's not very fast. She only makes 28 knots or 25 knots, and she only has one formation of 12 swordfish. So she's basically a jeep carrier. She's not very. She's not going to do much on her own, and I don't have a lot of warships to escort her. In addition to all of that, we do have some reinforcements on the way to the Dutch East Indies. We've got this surface combat task force of 2 heavy cruisers and 2 light cruisers, the Cornwall, the Exeter, the Enterprise, and the Glasgow. So some experienced veteran crews that'll help reinforce some of our heavy forces, since we did lose several ships there. That'll kind of be the nucleus of a new formation that we'll build, after we try and get these ships away. So this is going to probably be the climactic battle of the Battle of Mersing. The major air engagement was day 1. That kind of set the tone for the battle. Day 2 was a series of major surface engagements, and day 3 is sort of the disengagement phase as the various surface task forces attempt to get away, and we'll see how that all plays out. I've changed most of these aircraft, which were on bombing raids to search duties, to make sure that we've got a good visual on where all the Japanese ships are, so that there's nothing that's surprising me. And in addition to that, I've also taken the advantage of all of these other task forces going on. Means I'm actually going to go ahead and load up some tankers that are currently in Singapore with a bunch of naval fuel and try and have them escape to Perth in Australia. That's mainly because you do need to supply Australia with things like shipping fuel or oil and other things like that to keep the Australian economy going. And since we've got all this clutter of other ships, this seems like the best time to try and have this task force escape. Essentially, there's so much going on. If these guys went on any other turn when there was nothing going on, Japanese bombers out of Saigon would have some fat, juicy targets. Now they might be preoccupied with the battleships. And then, on the other hand, there's a chance they target the tankers instead of the battleships, and in that case, I'd be okay with that also. But they're pulling 36,000 units of fuel out of Singapore. That's about 3/10 of what was there. There's down to 74,000, which is more than enough for what we're going to use Singapore for going forward. But also, anything I can deny to the Japanese, I'm happy with. So I've been very liberal with ordering my ships to move at flank speed and other things like that, frankly, because I don't care if I burn all the fuel up. I'd rather burn the fuel up and prevent the Japanese from having much in the way of spoils of war, if you will. I don't want them taking large stockpiles of fuel, so we might as well burn it all. But anyway, let's see here. So that being said, that's kind of the situation here. We've got task forces doing anti-submarine warfare. We've got battleships trying to escape. We've got fighters flying cap. We've got torpedo bombers flying aggressive missions against enemy surface vessels and surface task forces. And we'll see what happens. I anticipate we will see enemy aircraft trying to attack our battleships. Last turn was overcast. The forecast for this turn is clear skies. So that does pose some challenges for our force's ability to stay hidden. We're not going to duck into any rain squalls or anything like that. We're not going to see his bombers grounded or whatever happened last turn. So this is going to be it. And there's a good chance we lose both battleships. There's a high chance we lose at least one of them. But we'll see how that plays out. I don't know what the moonlight's only 28%, so at least it's not a full moon. I guess that's a positive in terms of could these ships maybe escape a submarine. Speaking of, there's a lot of activity going on this turn with cargo ships. I'm pulling some fuel out of Palembang as well. There's a ton of fuel in the Dutch East Indies because this is where fuel is produced. These are all oil-producing facilities. You can see here they produce 900 oil at Palembang. And again, if I can pull 30,000 or 20,000 fuel out of there, that's that much less fuel that can go back and fuel the Japanese advance, fuel the Japanese merchant marine, or fuel Japanese industry. So I'm sure it's a pinprick in what I'm doing in terms of trying to get things out, but I've organized various task forces to try and pull as much fuel out as possible from Java as well. We've got some forces here moving to Darwin. Again, even if we don't get much out that impacts him, it's that much less fuel we have to ship to Australia from America. Because again, there's the similar scenario where Australia needs to get needs to be supplied, and this is a much closer source of that supply than coming all the way from the United States. So that's kind of the situation in Singapore this turn. It'll be a big turn for Singapore, but it's not the only thing going on this turn. A few other things going on. I've started putting together some supply convoys, so I'm loading up some fuel in Abadan, which is going to go to Colombo. I'm also loading up some fuel in Aden, which is going to go to Colombo. I'm loading up some supplies in Cape Town, which will go to Australia. Some supplies there. In the United States, I've formed a whole bunch of task forces with supply going to various different islands, and I've also started forming up some transport task forces. So we're loading up an infantry regiment and sending it to Christmas Island. We're loading up a Marine regiment, I think. Should be. No, not that one. Different task force. We're loading up a Marine regiment somewhere. Is it down in San Diego, probably? Yeah. We're loading up the 8th Marine Regiment. We're sending it to Pago Pago. And we're loading up an Australian infantry brigade, currently located at Sydney. I changed the headquarters on the 9th Australian Infantry Brigade, and we're sending it to Fiji. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm sending an Australian infantry brigade to Suva in Fiji. I'm sending an American infantry regiment to Pago Pago here, just to the east of Fiji. And I'm sending another American infantry regiment. American Marine regiment's going to Pago Pago. An American infantry regiment is going to Christmas Island over here. The reason is the Japanese took Canton Island, and they have an island that will allow them to place aircraft and potentially pose a challenge to our shipping lanes. Additionally, it could be a staging area for further drives south to Fiji or to Pago Pago or to Suvai or to Christmas Island. Christmas Island and Palmyra are two islands that are obviously ideal targets for the Japanese if they want to try and cut our supply lines from the United States to Australia or cut our ability to really leverage Hawaii in any way. If they took Palmyra or Christmas Island, they kind of cut off the advance to the south from Hawaii, and if they took Midway to the north, they kind of cut off the northern avenue. I'm not doing much with Midway. I don't really know if he's going to do anything up there, but in any event, it's kind of isolated on its own. But if we lost Johnson Island, Palmyra, and Midway, that would be problematic. So I'm doing what I can to reinforce these southern islands to keep the supply line to Australia open and basically build a barrier to further Japanese advances. So we're doing all of that. We've got some troops already about to arrive at Suva It looks like a field artillery brigade and U.S. base forces, and we're beginning to order those troops to dig in and build fortifications to resist the Japanese should they advance. In addition to that, we're building supply convoys for all of those units to make sure that they have sufficient supply, and we're sending all of our tankers in Australia to the Dutch East Indies to try and suck as much oil out of the Dutch East Indies as possible. In addition to that, I'm taking some troops out of Darwin, so I've formed up 2 troop transport convoys in Darwin and the northern coast of Australia, the Sparrow Infantry Battalion and the Gull Infantry Battalion. Not huge forces, about 50 infantry attack value here that we're sending to Ambon, which will increase its garrison from 60 to around 110, which basically means they'll be about as strong as an infantry regiment. So not a brigade, but a regiment, a decent-sized force. And they're going to go to Ambon. And then we're sending about the similar strength to Kendari, which will bring it up to strength. So at least it should be strong enough to withstand a lone Japanese assault from like a guard unit or an SLNF force. Essentially trying to build a little bit of a barrier here, a kind of a northern wall, protect the flank to the island of Java, protect sort of the northern realm of Australia here. If we put these troops up here, then there's a little bit more of a speed bump between Australia and the eventual Japanese conquests here in the Dutch East Indies. Whew, that's a lot of talking here. Let's see here. In addition to that, what else am I doing? Well, I've started to pull some of my fighters out of the Philippines. He's hammering these guys relentlessly. We've basically got no viable aircraft left here. We've got a couple of P-35s, and we had a couple of P-40s and some damaged B-17s. But what I'm actually doing here is I'm pulling the bulk of my fighters out to the south to Kaigan. I've pulled 3 squadrons of P-40s, and I'm going to kind of slowly move them south, either toward Australia or toward Java. I haven't decided which. These are, I'm going to pull out as much as I can. Right now, they're just portions of these squadrons, but I would like to move the whole squadron out as they recover and form kind of a unified formation here, but I'm going to have to pay to change their headquarters. So for the moment, they're just kind of sitting down here in Kaigan, but eventually they'll fly from here to probably Tarente or Kandari if they can reach, and then from there to either Darwin or to Java here. I debated sending them to Singapore. I could still try and do that and really build up a bastion here, because Singapore still has a lot of viable aircraft, whereas the Philippines don't. But that will probably change as soon as he brings more Zeros and Oscars to bear in Singapore. Our Air Force will rapidly deplete itself, trying to hold the Japanese off. If we take a look at the results last turn, that will kind of bear that out. We lost 5 aircraft in air-to-air combat. The Japanese actually lost 13. The Japanese lost 5 destroyed on the field. We lost 10. We lost 1 by flak. They lost 1 by flak. They lost 6 ops losses. We lost 4. So altogether, 25 Japanese aircraft lost, 20 Allied aircraft lost this turn. Remember, that is influenced by fog of war, so that's not perfectly accurate. But you can see here we really savaged some Ki-21 Sally bombers. These are army bombers for the Japanese that were attempting to attack Kutan without fighter escort. We had our Buffaloes that were kind of milling about. I think it was kind of a cap that leaked away from our surface task force because it kind of broke up. And they engaged those bombers, shot down 11. We lost 5 Warhawks over the Philippines. The Japanese lost 4 Zeros, 2 air-to-air, 2 on the ground. I'm guessing maybe when we bombed Saigon. Meanwhile, we lost some Seagulls when we lost the Houston, so these 4 aircraft were lost on the ground when the Houston sank. They were spotter aircraft for the Houston. The Japanese lost 2 Lilies as ops losses. And they lost some spotting aircraft, Daves, I think, when the Haruna was sunk, because we did sink the Haruna, and just sort of a general list of other aircraft that were lost this turn. If we take a look at our top pilot screen here, nobody's in ace yet, but we got a couple of people getting close. We've got Brownall, a first lieutenant in the Philippines, flying P-40s. And then we have squadron leader F.J. Howell, who has 3 aircraft shot down in a Buffalo, which is pretty impressive. Actually, a couple of Buffaloes showing up here near the top, 2 Buffaloes to be exact. So anyway, we lost 7 pilots killed, 2 wounded. So far in the campaign, we've lost 47 killed, 41 wounded. If we go to ships sunk, again, remember this is all colored by fog of war, but if we just take a look at last turn, there were quite a few ships sunk because of the Battle of Mersing. Now, if we take a look, let's do it by value here. First, let's just do the Japanese. We're claiming the Haruna and the Congo were both sunk. I don't believe the Congo was sunk at all. First off, it says it was sunk by a 500-pound general purpose bomb. We didn't have any aircraft bomb the Congo to my knowledge, so I don't know how that would have been possible. In addition to that, we saw the Congo in combat multiple times. We did some damage to her. We hit her with a lot of shells, but very little penetrating damage, and none of our reports said she was heavily damaged. So this is probably erroneous. The Haruna, however, we got a report in one of our battles that she was indeed sunk, so I'm pretty damn confident that this is sunk. That would mean the Haruna, one of the Congo-class battleships, sunk. One of the Japanese Navy's best battleships, sunk. Meanwhile, we also sank the Yaguri, which is a Habuki-class destroyer, one of the destroyers that was torpedoing our task force. We also sank the Haibuyusha, a torpedo boat. And then we sank a Japanese submarine, the I-158. We saw her sink. Our destroyers forced her to the surface via bad damage around here, and then she was sunk by gunfire. And then we sank the transport ship Arima Maru, and the midget submarine Ha-14. Meanwhile, on our side last turn, it was not a cheap turn. We lost the Houston, which is a heavy cruiser with 35 points. We lost the Java, which is a Dutch light cruiser. We lost two Dutch destroyers, the Banker and the Van Ness. We lost the British patrol gunboat, the Herald. And then we lost a troop transport in the Hong Kong and the Tai Sang transport ship. These are all 100% accurate. We know for a fact there's no fog of war for our ships. We know what we lost. The one positive I will say, when the U.S. Navy loses a heavy cruiser, they get a free replacement. So it doesn't happen right away, but in terms of ship availability, if we were to go all ships and we go to heavy cruisers and we were just to include the United States Navy, we get a brand new heavy cruiser at some point in the future. I'm not sure which one that is. I don't know if it's the St. Paul, or if it's the Pittsburgh or the Boston or the Baltimore. I'm not sure which. I just know that when you lose a cruiser when you lose a cruiser as the United States, you get an automated replacement later in the war. That's the way that game works. So for every heavy cruiser the U.S. Navy gets, you will get a new heavy cruiser being built. And I believe it generally takes like a year, 2 years or something like that for it to come out. So it's still a ways away, but it's coming. Maybe it's actually the Canberra 2. Canberra. Chicago 2, Quincy 2. I'm not quite sure. The fact that they've got a number 2 next to it makes me think maybe that's what it is, but I don't think we've lost any other heavy cruisers in this game, have we? Ships sunk. All ships, heavy cruisers. No, we haven't, so I don't know why we'd have that many duplicate heavy cruisers. Not quite sure. In any event, we've got additional ships coming there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else worth calling out here before we wind this one down. The Japanese did land additional troops in the Philippines, a little bit further up the sort of peninsula here on the southeast corner of Luzon. So they'll take this hex next turn probably, and they'll kind of work on getting these troops further north. It's only a small, well, I guess it says 10,000 soldiers, so they're putting a lot of effort into that invasion here. Meanwhile, we've kind of formed this line here between Manila and Clark Field as we start to sort of pull our troops back. Let's actually move all these troops over to move order, and let's go ahead and have them all go to Bataan. Our coastal artillery battery can move. Nice. Can we actually strategically move it? All right, we can strategically move it to Clark Field at least. Then we move these guys to Bataan, which is where our last stand will be. I have no illusions about actually holding the Philippines, but the longer I can hold it against him, the better. So we'll pull those guys out of that base right away. These guys are already moving. I think we get some additional reinforcements that come into Manila before too long, but that is what it is. I'm actually going to stop building. I was building fortifications in Manila. I'm going to stop building those fortifications. They're not going to be done in time, and I don't want to spend the supply here in with his troops rapidly moving up the peninsula. Let me see here. Can these guys move directly to Bataan, or do they have to move through Clarkfield? Yeah, they've got to move through Clark, I think. We'll see. All right, so we might as well move all of our forces out of Manila. Well, we'll leave one, just because I think we get reinforcements here. So we'll move all the rest. Some of them are already moving. We'll kind of link everybody up there. Okay. And this is kind of a little bit of the tediousness that you can get with this game at times, as it does get a little bit tedious at times. That's just the nature of this game. But it's why you have so much frickin' detail in games like this. It's kind of cool. Okay. Alright, so everybody's moving out there. Once they're all gone, we'll obviously be pulling out our aircraft to other facilities as well. It's going to take a few turns, though, for them to all leave. Quite a bit of aviation support there. Some PT boats. We've got a submarine that's somewhat badly damaged. I've also ordered all of our submarines from the west coast to Pearl Harbor, and then they're going to go to Japan. And I've also ordered some of our submarines near Pearl Harbor to head for the Japanese coast. So other things to be aware of. With that being said, I think that's a good summary of where we're at right now. Expect the third day of the Battle of Mersing to kind of be the final end-all, be-all. It's going to tell us how this actual conflict is going to resolve itself. There's a lot of ships out here that the Japanese could mop up on. There's a lot of, hopefully, distraction to keep the Japanese away from our battleships. But I'm assuming that AI will, if they see a stricken battleship, will send their aircraft after them versus undamaged warships. I'm not sure. We'll see. In any event, that kind of concludes the December 13th turn, and I think we're about ready to turn it over to XTRG. So I appreciate you all tuning in. Let me check in with the chat real quick here before we go. Lie to the public about our losses? Probably not. Yeah, well, I don't get to order my Montanas. Those I don't think ever complete. If I actually, let's take a look. Go to ship available. I think you only get the ships that were historically completed. There are a few mods that change ship availability. So you can see we've got quite a few British battleships which will be coming. But if we take away the British here, you can see, or the French, really? We're going to get the Richelieu in April of 44. All right. So, if we take a look here, yeah, we don't get the Montanas ever. We get the Iowas. We also would get some ships that'll be transferred back from the Atlantic, and we get the cruisers, the large cruisers, the Alaska and the Guam will come into service for us later in the war, very late in the war, with their 12-inch guns. These basically battle cruisers. Okay. Got a lot of frickin' cruisers. Even more destroyers. I won't boggle your mind there. I don't know if you can you rename ships? I'm not really sure if I can do that. Can I rename ships that are already in existence? I can name task forces, but I can't rename a ship. I was thinking that'd be kind of awesome if I could rename a ship and name it like the XTRG or something like that and just confuse the hell out of them. But alas, not an option. Okay. All right, guys. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. I appreciate you all tuning in. And we'll see what the results are as soon as XTRG can get everything turned around and get back to us. There are mods, no names. So like there's a reluctant admiral mod, for example, which assumes that the Japanese and the Allies come to the war better prepared. And so you see there's much stronger French forces in the region, and they start out immediately accessible to you. The Japanese get more carriers, more battleships. The Allies get more carriers, more battleships. So it's kind of more of like everybody on steroids at the start of the war, which is kind of an interesting idea. But anyway. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this episode of War in the Pacific Admiral Edition, our play-by-email game, currently underway with XTRG. We kind of ignored China. I'm still moving some troops around. I'm stopping the attacks on Yichang for the moment. We reduced the forts basically to 0, but it looked like he had another infantry division that either arrived or was there that we weren't sort of aware of. However, we've got substantial reinforcements coming in the next week or so, so I'm hoping I can still overwhelm them here. Meanwhile, between Xinyang and Hankow, we just had a skirmish, nothing serious, against some Japanese forces here, but we've got some additional reinforcements that'll be arriving in a day or two. Once those 3 corps arrive, we're going to go full-blown onto the attack, and we're going to try and hopefully cut off Xinyang and then eventually destroy his forces there. But until then, again, that would be the objective of destroying his multiple divisions here in Xinyang, and then also dealing a severe blow to the troops in Yichang. If we could sort of steer those 2 victories for us, that'd go a long way toward helping the situation in China. Hong Kong will probably fall next turn, by the way, guys. Just my anticipation. Can we send these guys out? I think we have a house rule that says I can't send motor torpedo boats out more than a hex or something like that. I would love to send these guys out to intercept this convoy moving east. Maybe they'll do it on their own accord. They do have max react set to 6, although I don't think they have enough fuel to really go very far out from shore. What's their commander, by the way? I won't do anything to intentionally cause them to do that, but we're going to go ahead and get a super aggressive commander there. It's level 70 aggression. Maybe they'll jump out at this force on their own and engage these tankers. That'd be freaking awesome if we knocked out 3 or 4 enemy tankers with torpedo boats. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode, guys, for the 5th time. I appreciate you all tuning in and continuing to watch and support the series. Let me know your thoughts as always, and until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.